Alrighty, so we're on the hour now. So why don't we get started? I want to thank everyone who's tuned in now for joining us today, and I'd like to give a warm welcome to Ryan Neely, a lawyer from Farris LLP out of British Columbia. Ryan is an expert in immigration law and has agreed to give us an outlook on what's going on these days with respect to COVID-19 and its effects on immigration and border policy. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please type them into the Q&A feature, and I'll read them out loud at the end of the presentation. So Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with us today. And now I will mute myself and let you take it away.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and your members. It's certainly, to use a probably overused sentiment, we live in very interesting times right now. That's certainly no different with respect to Canadian immigration. I know we've been in the news a lot in terms of changes and sort of border closures and getting essential workers into Canada, and also just dealing with foreign workers and foreign nationals who are stuck here in Canada. So it's a timely topic, and it is an area that's changing a lot. And so I just want to sort of point out that, of course, anything that's presented today is up to date as of today, but by the time you wake up tomorrow, it may very well be different. So it's just, this is more of an overview and an opportunity to have you guys know who I am, and of course, invite any of you to contact me outside of this presentation at a later date should you have additional questions. So I thought about sort of breaking this down into three sort of areas, and that is, with respect to COVID-19, where is Canadian immigration right now? Where do I think we'll be in the short term, and that's sort of about 2 to 4 months from now? And then what does the post-COVID-19 Canadian immigration world look like? Again, this is for Canadian inbound immigration. So one thing you're going to hear me talk about a lot is just sort of application processing times. One of the themes that we're going to hit on with respect to now, future, and well into the future is just how much longer it's going to take to sort of process applications across the board. Right now, I would say that new applications are temporarily paused. Existing applications that are in the queue are just going to take longer. There's just going to be longer timelines across all delivery streams. That's work permits, visitor visas, study permits, permanent residence, citizenship, really across the whole gamut of Canadian immigration. We're just looking at longer processing times. Right now, we've got fairly strict border controls and travel restrictions. I see that lasting at least for another month. If not slightly longer, and then I think we'll see likely a sort of a lifting of some of those controls. There seems to be a greater concern for protection of food security and supply chain. There's going to be a greater concern for domestic labor market going forward. There's a lot of challenges for temporary residents who are already here. And there's been some pretty significant reactions on behalf of the provincial and federal government already to address some of those concerns. I just have sort of a quick list here. For temporary foreign workers who are in Canada, who are sort of facing an uncertain future, there's been a number of changes. Some of them are access to medical services and sort of provincial medical plans. Traditionally, that's never been extended to people who are on something called implied status, a period of time between the expiry of a work permit and the issuance of a new work permit. That's now been waived across almost all provinces, and individuals who are on implied status are now receiving coverage, continued coverage under their provincial healthcare plans. EI and the new CERB benefits that are offered for unemployed individuals. Again, traditionally, temporary foreign workers on employer-specific work permits were never really able to access those benefits. And the government seems to have thrown that door wide open and said that those CERB benefits are really for anybody who's been employed within the last year in Canada. There's been a suspension of removals. And just recently, pardon me, those are allergies, not COVID. Study permit holders are now eligible to work full-time if their school has canceled classes. And that was just announced, I think, just yesterday. And recently there's been some online landing of permanent residents who are already in Canada or who were on their way to Canada prior to border control measures being put in place. And then finally, sort of one of the themes that I'm really training my mind to is as we look forward is there going to be a greater interest for people to potentially relocate to Canada in the future because it's seen as a safe destination? We're obviously very early on in this game, but it appears that as a country we're doing very well in terms of our sort of response to the challenges that COVID has presented. And I'm always interested as to whether, will Canada be seen as a safe place for those shopping for a new place to live in, 2, 4, 6 years from now. So where are we right now? Right now, effectively, visa offices and visa application centers are basically closed. So the visa offices are your standard visa offices overseas, government run, usually within the Consul General's office. And then the visa application centers are private businesses that operate as an application intake and visa delivery system that are privately run and contracted by the federal government. So really both of those offices worldwide are closed. There's a couple offices in China that are visa application centers that are still offering sort of limited services. But generally these officers are now working through existing inventory, but they're doing so from home. You technically can still file applications for overseas processing. Really, there's no movement on new cases. So, technically, you can file an application for a work permit online, but there's really going to be no movement on that application, and that's because of the next bullet point, which is that biometrics collection centers and panel physicians are almost all closed across the world. So Canada's been, in the last couple of years, very interested in imposing these additional requirements on individuals looking to travel to Canada, one of them being the collection of biometrics, which is a digital application photo and a set of digital fingerprints obtained from a secure collection point. Now, when you file a new visa application overseas, within 24 hours, you're receiving your biometrics collection letter, which invites you to go to a biometrics collection point and give your biometrics. Of course, if those biometric collection centers aren't open, there's no way for that application to move forward. Traditionally, you're only given 30 days to provide those. And even in the past, that's been difficult to do to get, especially for panel physicians for immigration medical exams. It's been very difficult to get those appointments in time. There's a very limited number of what are called panel physicians to provide those immigration medicals. And that's only getting just more and more difficult now with all these sort of services being closed. So really, you can file applications, but there's no movement on new applications. We're just seeing existing applications inventory sort of come down. Border closure is a very hot topic. It's been an extremely difficult topic to sort of stay on top of. Really, it started about a month ago now with sort of suggestions to self-isolate on return, sort of starting to effectively shut down travel from afar. Where we are and then it's gone all the way to the extreme of saying, really, no one's coming into the country, but unless you're here to provide what's called essential services. And we sort of backed off of that now a little bit, off of the essential services issue. We'll get to that a little bit below. But for you to understand right now where we're at is, in essence, the border is largely closed to foreign nationals. And there's absolutely no travel to Canada for simply tourist purposes or recreation purposes, anything that's really discretionary. There are exemptions to the border being closed, and those are for Canadian citizens and permanent residents and their immediate family members, assuming those family members are coming to Canada for the purpose of immigrating to Canada, not simply coming to Canada in order to ride out a worldwide pandemic. So we've really seen Canada Border Services Agency, which is the people on the front line of the border, taking a hard line on individuals who they suspect are simply coming back to Canada in order to ride out a sort of worldwide pandemic. So for instance, someone who lives in New York full-time, is a Canadian citizen, but has a spouse and 2 children who are US nationals, and they sort of decide, I got to get out of New York City, and they want to come back to Canada, and they say, well, we're just coming back here for, because it's not safe in New York City. Chances are CBSA is going to turn them around, even though they are Canadian citizens. Or the family members will be turned around. Foreign nationals with work permits or work permit approvals issued prior to March 18th, 2020, or study permits or study permit approvals issued prior to March 16, 2020, are eligible to travel to Canada. And again, this issue of essential service providers, we've sort of, again, that we were there at essential services providers being the only people who would be eligible for entry to Canada on work permits. We sort of backed off of that a little bit, most recently about 48 hours ago in the most recent order in council, which is referred back to what's called an optional and discretionary test. And that's what Immigration Canada has put out, which is saying, if it's optional or discretionary, you're not coming to Canada. But if it's work, if it's not optional, if it's not discretionary, if it's not tourism, recreation, or entertainment based, you are eligible to travel to Canada. That's sort of what we call the optional and discretionary test. Unfortunately, CBSA, again, which is the agency which exists at the port of entry, is often confusing this and applying the essential service test. And so they're looking at Public Service Canada's website and their definition of what is essential services. And we're seeing a lot of people turned away who should be admitted under optional and discretionary, but they're being turned away because Canada Border Services Agency is saying, no, it has to be an essential service, which is incorrect. It's an area of considerable confusion. I don't see it getting much better over the next couple of weeks, but eventually everything will get worked out. There are now strict quarantine requirements for all arrivals, citizens, permanent residents, foreign nationals. Everyone is subject to strict 14-day quarantine requirements. Where the essential service designation comes in is whether CBSA should be waiving that 14-day quarantine for individuals who are coming to Canada to perform essential services. So it shouldn't be applied at the entry test, but it should be applied at the whether to impose the quarantine restriction for foreign nationals. So where do I think we'll be in sort of 2 to 4 months from now? I think we're going to see a slow opening of visa offices, visa application centers around the world. I think that the services offered are going to be sort of offered in an incremental fashion. I don't think everything's going to come back online at once. I do anticipate a fairly big rush to file applications. So while there's already an existing backlog, I think we're just going to see that backlog grow. Again, I sort of come back to the increased processing times for most applications. Biometric collection centers and panel positions will open, but the lead times to obtain those appointments for those services, it's going to be significant. Again, as I said, biometrics was certainly better overseas. You could often go into a visa application center and provide your biometrics within the same day. Within Canada, it was more difficult to get biometrics collection appointments because they were really only being offered by Service Canada centers, and those again remain closed. And it was challenging for people to get appointments to provide those biometrics within Canada within the 30 days requirement. That was prior to all this. So now as you have a huge rush of applications coming in, I anticipate it's going to be more and more difficult to meet those 30-day from 30 days to 60 days, so even 90 days. For panel physicians, those are the individuals who perform immigration medical exams. For individuals who have spent 6 months in countries designated as requiring immigration medicals. They were in short order before all this. It was often extremely difficult to get an appointment to provide an immigration medical exam with a panel physician within the 60 days required by the visa office. I anticipate, again, that is going to be extremely challenging. I don't know if we'll hopefully see more panel physicians being admitted to the roles by IRCC, but again, that's going to be a significant challenge, and we may move from a 60-day to a 90-day or even 120-day period in which to provide those results. Applications across all processing streams, both temporary and permanent, will likely be subject to further delays if local documents are required. And by local documents, I mean things like original police certificates. So you've got, the COVID restrictions really had an impact on the infrastructure within most countries around the world. And so the ability to get things like police certificates and other required documents, you may find that there's a significant backlog for those. I think we're going to see the federal government tweak existing programs to fast track applicants in particular industries and even potentially disqualify other industries. Provincial governments are likely going to do the same thing with their provincial nominee programs. So for instance, right now, we've removed, it had been that in order to get a labor market impact assessment, if you were offering a job that had a wage rate that was in the top 10% of the provincial average, you got 10-day processing on those applications. That's been gone now. That's been taken away. Those applications are put in with normal processing, which is taking an inordinately long period of time, sort of 3 to 5 months. And the federal government has pushed to the top of the pile applications that are involved with agribusiness, food security, supply chain management, things like that. Provincial governments may very well do the same thing, again, within their provincial nominee program frameworks. Already in British Columbia, we're seeing the British Columbia Provincial Nominee Program start to disqualify certain jobs from being selected for permanent residence. I think as unemployment rates start to come up and stay up, we'll see provincial governments starting to pick and choose who they want to have for permanent residence within their province. And border controls, I just see them being a thing now going forward. Already we were looking at exit controls coming into effect fairly quickly for Canada, but I think there's going to be greater border controls going forward. So I'm just seeing a number of, okay, just want to make sure that those weren't questions from me right now. So what does a post-COVID-19 Canadian immigration framework look like? And again, I just want to point out that this is sort of more my thoughts rather than sort of really any way to know exactly what things are going to look like in sort of a year or two from now. And that's really what I'm talking about. It's a year or two from now, because it seems like we're going to be stuck with COVID-19 until either an effective treatment or an immunization becomes available. I think there's going to be lingering unemployment. Personally, I think there will be lingering unemployment, and I think the unemployment numbers are going to be pretty high. Because of that, I think it's going to be really challenging for Canadian employers to obtain labor market impact assessments. One of the cornerstones of a labor market impact assessment is to confirm and show that you have tested the Canadian labor market for any job being offered. And I think as we start seeing unemployment rates shoot above 6, 8, 10%, it's going to be very challenging for employers to say, listen, there's just no one here in Canada to do this job. And that argument just becomes harder and harder. So I think companies seeking to engage foreign workers are going to have to be alive to their labor market impact assessment exempt work permits, things like international treaties and significant Canadian benefits, intercompany transferees. The list is long, but it's going to be really important for HR people within Canadian employers to start becoming aware of these LMIA exempt work permits. Once foreign nationals are here, and you've worked hard to get them here on a work permit, it's going to be terribly advantageous to transition the foreign national to a permanent resident status rather than keep them on work permit status. I think that permanent immigration to Canada is going to become more challenging. The way our permanent residence application intake management system works is it really seeks to only invite the most qualified, most valuable applicants. I do think we'll see an increased interest in Canada as a safe destination. And as such, I think we're going to see those sort of selection criteria start to incrementally creep up and it become more and more challenging to become a permanent resident of Canada. I also think there's potential for Canada to remove countries from a visa-free travel list to Canada. And what that'll do is that'll allow us to be a little bit more selective on reviewing individuals prior to them boarding a plane to come to Canada. I think that's more sort of in the short, long term, so within the next year or two. And then as we get past COVID-19, potentially that list will be repopulated. So as an employer in Canada, and potentially one that uses foreign workers, what steps can you take right now? If it were me and I were sort of within HR, within a company that has Canadian foreign workers in Canada, I'd be undertaking an internal audit of your temporary foreign workers. I'd want to understand when their work permits expire, what kind of work permits they're on, whether they have a path to permanent residence. I'd be transitioning key personnel that are currently on work permits to permanent residence as soon as possible, understanding that processing times are going to be significantly pushed out. Again, with that idea of processing times going up, I'd be applying as early as possible to extend critical work permits. And I would be assessing your short-term, your long-term needs for foreign workers, and sort of having in mind a consideration of the sources of work permits that are outside of the labor market impact assessment route. I provided a couple what I think are useful resources, and I understand that the slide deck is going to become available to all participants after the presentation, and the links all work in that slide deck. We've got our own firm resource center. It's really high-level overviews of legal issues that are affected to COVID-19. It's updated frequently. I've put a couple of updates up there in late March and early April, but the changes, honestly, in Canadian immigration were happening so fast and so frequently that it became sort of impossible to try and keep up. I do plan on, as things slow down a little bit, putting a more comprehensive overview up. IRCC, Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada's general COVID-19 page. That's just sort of, again, a high-level, sort of layman's terms overview of COVID-19's effects on various stakeholders, temporary residents, individuals who are applying for permanent residence, individuals who are applying for citizenship. And then as you dive a little deeper, you've got IRCC's program delivery instructions. Now those are a little bit more specific, a little bit more legalese, but they're sort of what I would say is the instructions to visa officers and IRCC officers on how to take in applications and how to process applications during these times. IRCC also has a COVID-19 foreign worker page, which is set up as a FAQ page. And again, interesting to look through there if you have temporary foreign workers currently. The Government of Canada quarantine site, again, just an overview of the 14-day quarantine measures in effect right now. And then Public Safety Canada provides their essential services and functions list. Again, each province also has their own essential services and functions list. And while the test that's supposed to be applied by at the port of entry is the optional and discretionary test, again, we're sort of seeing CBSA applying the essential services test. So if you've got individuals who are looking to travel to Canada for work, be aware that while they may be entitled to come here to work, they may face significant questioning at the port of entry by a border services officer on why it is that the services they're providing are essential. And then two quick Twitter pages. It still blows my mind that we sort of take legal direction from Twitter tweets, but you know, that's the day and age we're in. And so there's the IRCC's Twitter and CBSA's Twitter handles. My contact information is here. I really invite anybody to get in touch with me if you have sort of case-specific questions or questions that you don't want to ask in a public forum. I'm more than happy to have a quick chat with you, and I'm again more than available to answer questions. Just want to sort of turn it over, I guess, now to some questions and answers that are more general in terms. And so, Emily, if you have those.
Great. Yeah, we have had one question come in. I'll read it out now. And in the meantime, any other participants that would like to ask a question, you can go ahead and use the Q&A feature and bring your mouse pointer down to the bottom of your screen. You'll see it pop up. So the first question we got, it says, for PR applications already in process, do you foresee that IRCC would request updated documents from home countries that have expired during the delayed processing?
I don't. I think IRCC has been really good actually about waiving certain requirements. Just the fact that they're now automatically landing people shows to me that they're trying to move applications along and not slow down the processing of applications already in their existing queue. Additionally, I assume that this is likely a question about police certificates, maybe, because police certificates in theory expire after 6 months. But it's important to know that so long as the individual applicant who's applying for permanent residence has not returned to that country since the time that that police certificate was valid, that it remains valid indefinitely, even though the police certificate said on its face says it's only valid for 3 months or 6 months. The fact that the individual is not returned to that country means that the validity of that police certificate is extended indefinitely.
Great. Well, thanks, Ryan. I haven't seen anything else come in yet, but you did provide your contact information, and any participants that if they want to contact me, I can always send questions over to Ryan for his attention.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks for the opportunity. And yeah, just a sort of a note to just please reach out if you have any questions.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Ryan, for taking the time today to help us out.
All the best.
Great. We'll wrap up now. Thank you.
Cheers.